Okay, good afternoon, everybody. That's good. Oh, I thought there might... Right, you're sitting comfortably, I can see that. Your agenda for this afternoon, number 1, attendance. May I welcome all members and officers to the Cross-Cutting Resources Business Overview and Scrutiny meeting. As a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language with our public meetings. I confirm I have not received any notification or request to use Welsh today, therefore the meeting will be conducted in the medium of English only. As a remind you that this meeting has been collected webcast, therefore I ask you to turn off or silence any noisy devices that you may have and ensure you're speaking clearly into the microphones. It says on here, for your information, in case of a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. As far as I know, we're not having any. Could you also remember, as I don't sometimes, to sign the attendance register and confirm any apologies you may receive for the meeting. As far as I know, there's no declarations of interest in this meeting. Chris has got some apologies. Chris has some apologies, so over to Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got apologies from Councillors Giles Davis, John Horler, Kelly Preston, Rose Seaborn and Louise Shepherd. Thanks.
Right, thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. As I just said, I don't think there is declarations of interest on this, but it might be at the previous minutes you want to declare something. So we go on to item 3, which is confirmation of minutes of 13th of 9th, 2018. Page number, we'll go through clarification of minutes to start with and then go on to the meet. Page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Anybody got any points that they've missed or whatever? Somebody propose those and second those, please? No, I'm looking at you. Thank you. And Joe, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back through those. Any points that anybody wants to raise? Page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Thanks, Ron. You said no there. And Stuart, thank you. Brilliant. No, that's brilliant. Right. So item number 4.
Chair, can I bring something up there on page 4?
Yeah.
In reference to the use of drones because of the instance of fly tipping. Has any recommendations been followed up?
I'm not sure. Anybody got any information on that?
Thank you. Yes, the recommendations are being collated at the moment, and we will get those to you within the next week or 2.
Is that okay, Stuart? Yourself?
Can I come in on that drone one? Then, what is the plan? To catch them fly tipping, or just to go to the area and find the fly tipping after it's been done?
I think the officers suggested to get back to you. Is that in writing?
Yeah.
Is that okay, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Any other responses wanted on the minutes, or can we move on? Right, thank you there. Hello, Hugh. Have you got your card? Thank you. Let Hugh sit down a minute before we get on to the substantive bit of the... Right, thank you. Are you comfortable? Good. Right. Oh, God. Hello, another one. Sit down there, please. Take your card. Thank you. And sit down. I will then announce the substantive item for the agenda. You've just missed the housekeeping, as it were, in the minutes, where they were all okay, other than that, I'm approved. Lovely. Thank you, there. Right. Agenda item number 4 is cross-cutting resources overall that Business Overall and Scrutiny Committee, and it's on the subject of draft local toilet strategy. And your officers today are all sat in front of you, so I'm going to ask them if they would introduce themselves, and then Sue and Lyndon will introduce the strategy. Okay?
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Honeywell, Partnerships and Policy Officer in the PSSU. Joined the Council in July.
Good afternoon, I'm Sue Brown and I'm Partnerships and Policy Manager for the PSSU.
Good afternoon, members. I'm Lyndon Purry, Head of PSSU.
Good afternoon, Joe Lewis, Lead Finance Officer for Neighbourhoods.
Good afternoon, Steve Jarrett, Assistant Chief Officer, Environment and Technical Neighbourhood Services.
I'm Steve Horseman, I'm the Street Team Team Leader.
Right, just before Lyndon starts, I'll just say a couple of words as Chair. I hope everybody's had a bit of a read of this and you've got an idea of what it's about. I think it's really useful that we've got draft toilet strategy. I know you've all got views on the subject. I certainly have. Certainly I've got older, it's something that's rather pertinent. And I'll go over to Lyndon now to introduce it, and I know Sue's got more detailed information on it. Thank you, Lyndon.
Thank you, Chair. Again, good afternoon, members. Before you today is a draft local strategy, and as Stephen, who introduced himself at the very beginning of the process here, joined us in July, and this was the first task that we allocated Stephen to take forward for us, and we're really pleased with the draft that's been produced. We have to produce this a local toilet strategy as part of legislation. It's part of the Public Health Wales Act 2017, and it enables us really to look at plotting what our current provision is for toilet facilities throughout the borough, and what will be our future requirements in the way in which, with the difficulties that we have with some elements of resourcing, how we can enable better access to toileting facilities across the borough. I'm just going to hand over to Sue now, who's going to take you through the report and who authored this report for you. And again, we're assuming that you've read the strategy, so we hope then to be taking some questions from you, and we're happy to take questions from the floor with the Chair's permission. So I'm going to pass over to Sue.
Thank you, Lyndon. I'd like to reiterate what Lyndon said, that this is a statutory requirement of all local authorities in Wales that we all have to publish a local toilet strategy by the end of May of this year. It doesn't require councils to provide all toilet provision, but it does require all toilets to consider how they will provide facilities going forward. So if any of the facilities we currently have for any reason are reduced or closed or changed in any way, to use this strategy as officers and councillors to look at alternatives within those areas, that we can still try and provide some facilities. And the guidance that we've had from Welsh Government and Public Health Wales has been very prescriptive. So the activities we've undertaken in doing the needs assessment in relation to the toilets, which has been provided in your background papers, and setting out the strategy itself, we followed very closely the guidance that we've been given. So I hope that you found it quite easy to read and go through, really. I'd like to thank Stephen, for all the work that he's done on this. As I say, he came in as a new member of staff, so with an empty diary. So our first task to set him was, you've got some time, go out, meet with people. He's done a lot of engagement with various individuals, with various groups across the borough. He's liaised with different third sector organisations. He's met with mother and toddler groups. He's met with fathers and children's groups. He's met with disabled groups, older people, younger people, and everybody in between. So he's got a good idea of where people were coming from, what their thoughts were. And we've worked very closely as well with our colleagues down at Neighbourhoods around the provision that the council itself owns and runs at the moment. So any questions around council provision, we will refer to the 3 people on our left. And anything around our work with partners, businesses going forward, then we'll try and pick those things up for you. I wasn't going to go through the strategy itself in detail because, as I say, hopefully you've read it. We know that you're going to have very strong views on it, and I thank you for coming along this afternoon and taking an interest in this, and hopefully help us now over the next few months to shape this up into something that you can really feel as elected members that you can own, as well as us officers. So if it's okay with you, I think I'll leave it there and open it for questions, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think, for sake of clarity, we probably go to get some sort of form on it if members think that's reasonable. We'll go on to your strategy document on page 23, and there's some questions that I can sort of usefully ask, your questions that you've been asking. Would that be reasonable, Sue? Members probably find that a reasonable approach. The questions are on 31, and it's the consultation questions. Are members happy with that as an approach? It's just we've got some ready written praise. Consultation question number 1 is, do you agree with these actions will provide clean, safe and well-maintained public toilets? If you've obviously got supplementaries you want to ask with them as well, please do. But it's your session, not mine and not the officers. You've got the officers here. But if you look on page 31, it's got some questions, and it says, it asks question, do you agree, what it's asking there, are public toilets, do you agree that they're safe, maintained questions? If not, please ask those questions, be real free. I just want to get some sense of clarity on this strategy, and if you've obviously got questions to ask officers and you direct them to officers, I just think it's just a way of doing it, because we haven't got any set questions here. But if you'd like to do that as an approach, it's just a way of going through. Are you happy with that? Okay. On 31 it says we've got a way of working here. So the first consultation question is, so you've got something here, right? It's just question, what actions do you feel does the strategy put in place to ensure the question of clean, safe and well-maintained public toilets? Does anybody want to come back on that? Stuart?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the, I think we needed to work more with the community safety team, especially in my ward, in regard to the public toilet at Lion Street, where there's been numerous occasions where drug dealing has taken place. And there's also an issue about the cleanliness of the toilets. I know it's a difficult one to square, because you can go in there and clean them at 3 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock they can be filthy, but members of the public don't see it that way. So that's 2 areas of concern I have, and I would like to see some more information about the opening hours and the information to gain radar, please.
I'll take that first. We've worked with the community safety team already in looking at the needs and some of the things going forward, and I think as we pick up issues like yourself then on particular toilet blocks or whatever, we'll work with Kate and her team further going forward around community safety and any issues. And I think Stephen's picked a few comments up as well during the consultation we've done already on existing things, so we'll make sure that we liaise on it as we would on any other community safety issue with the team around those things. Regarding opening hours, etc., we've included them at the moment on the mapping information, and our proposal is, as part of the strategy, that we will be publishing information and leaflets and online as well around, opening hours. We probably won't print the leaflets ourselves, because any changes to that, leaflets become out of date, and then people say that they've got a leaflet saying it's open at a certain time and actually it isn't. So, but we will encourage people to download them and work with organisations that can share the information as well. But we do propose...
I come back briefly on that, Sue.
Yeah.
I appreciate the information that you refer to, but I would have liked to see something on the actual toilets themselves that's there constant.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something we've picked up, and also people have asked us for, if the toilets are closed, could they have some signage to an alternative within a locality, so that, you know, if they do get somewhere and they find that particular facility is closed for whatever reason, that there's something that they're not then left with, oh gosh, this is closed, what do we do now? There's some signage on the toilets, and we'll have to talk about those things, about how those are resourced and how those are done, but that will be part of the strategic approach going forward. Thank you.
Answer a question that mystifies a lot of the residents in my ward as well, and that's regard to the unisex facility at the Lion Street toilets. I know there are two entrances, one ladies and one for gentlemen, and the ladies is a unisex. There's a lot of confusion about this one.
Can I refer that to my colleagues on the left there, because it's a facility we own, isn't it?
On this subject? Okay. Bob? Question. I don't know if did anybody get this set of questions that we emailed?
Sorry, Chair, I haven't had the answer about the unisex.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies, I don't know the layout of the Lion Street toilets myself. Is it urinals in the gents with no traps, and then a cubicle that's then available for unisex? It would seem to be, I would suggest, then it seems to be providing facilities for gentlemen rather than urinal facilities, so maybe not a female-only unisex for that particular need, I guess. But again, I'm suggesting that without knowing the detailed layout of the toilets.
If you could confirm that and let me have that information once it's good.
Certainly we'll look that for you and come back to you and get an explanation.
Sorry, Ron?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, unisex toilets. I came across one over the holiday period down at Brixham. I've never seen so many confused people in all my life stood outside. Ladies and gents, and nobody really, I think it must be quite new there. And I think we know abroad or wherever it's been in for years, but there is, let's do it, so there can be some confusion, but I stood outside there, and I didn't go in, because I wasn't sure either how it all works, so I just went over there for another one. But how many people were stood outside, I'm in an hour, and shall I, shan't I, will I, won't I, and it was quite funny actually, and but there can be confusion, and there, again, there's all cubicle toilets in there, there's no urinals. But yes, it was quite funny to see everything. I'm not going in there, I'm not going in there.
Okay, any more? Norma.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know where my question fits in, but some time ago the toilets at Panteg Cemetery were closed. Now I've had quite a few complaints about that, and I don't see how you can work with outsiders to provide the people outside the toilet, outside the cemetery. I think that's a unique place, but I think it is an important thing to have toilets in the cemetery. As we all know, some people go there and they like to sit there for some time. It's not only used for funerals, people like to go there for remembrance. Is there any chance of the toilets being opened? Because I think it's imperative they should have toilets at that cemetery.
Somebody's answering here, was you?
Yes, Councillor, you are quite correct. Some time ago the toilets become beyond economical repair and was closed. Funding was sought at the time, but no funding was made available. But it's definitely something we can look at and get back to you on.
Thank you.
Janet?
Chair, as Stuart will probably agree with me, we've had residents saying that baby changing facilities are placed in the ladies' toilets, but this isn't very great if you've got fathers out with their children. What do we do to improve that situation, please?
Thank you. This was something that I was aware of, not necessarily within the council provision, but I've got young children myself. But certainly, in some of the private sector, customer toilets and things. So we have asked, and I went to the Dad and Me forum that the play services run and spoke to some parents there. Found there's not an imbalance in terms of there are some toilets where there aren't baby changing in the males, but there also aren't any in the females. So we will look to try and get those. Comes down to budgets, whether or not that's in the next year or over a couple of years. I think we will look to put those baby changing, the pull down things in all of the toilets that we have.
Chair, thanks.
Stuart, and then Ron.
Thank you, Chair. On the back of that comment by Councillor Jones, I wonder how often the babies' nappy changing facilities are looked at, because they get heavily used and they're quite shoddy quickly. I wondered if there's any regime to inspect the nappy changing facilities.
Ron?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. On lots of these we have the normal toilets in the town centre. Then you've got one under discretion.
Sorry.
Can we go on?
I cut you in before Stuart had his question.
We can response, Chair, to that question.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit too quick there.
Sorry about that, Councillor. Yeah, in response to your question and query, obviously the guys that go in there and clean it do monitor it, but then any reports then are given back to property services for any maintenance that's required. You are quite right, they do get damaged quite quickly. We report them as often as we can, and then it's obviously down to budget to get them changed as quickly as possible.
What you were saying, Steve, is with respect is that it's purely on the cleansing operator to decide whether the use of the nappy change facility is no longer viable.
To a similar degree, what they'll do is they'll clean it and monitor it, and then obviously if it becomes unsafe, they'll report it to property services.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Ron, can I come back to you?
Sure enough?
Yeah.
Looking at that on the back where it's under discretion, Hentus Community Council, Hentus Community Hall were consulted, and it was 100% no. We wouldn't open the doors at all, because we tried it once when people, and it's used on a daily basis, and on a few occasions the mess we had in there said it all. So we wouldn't get involved in the consultation at all. And we've told people, users of the hall on a daily basis, that when they lock the doors, because when it's very busy during the summer the park is full, and that's when the trouble was. So they do have two pubs there, it's up to them. But we 100% no, thank you very much, because we have to clean it up. It's ours, it doesn't come under 12 at all. So it's a shame really, but it was 100% that no, we wouldn't. I've been there sometimes I let people in, because there's a member of the committee there. But other than that, when the users are in there, nobody else is allowed in there.
So everybody had to go on the spun? Could I just, sorry, Glyn.
Obviously looking through all this, I'm reading all that there, and the one part on here, it says that the council are looking at currently at the impact on people's need to access health services in future. Now, from Pontypool to Blenavon, in between we've got a place called Abercecon. There's no toilet in Abercecon, no toilet in Snatchwood. People like to shop in locally in Abercecon, and there's no way to change babies, no way to toilets or anything. Any chance of opening up a toilet in Abercecon, or alternatively finding somewhere where people can go to toilet in Abercecon?
Thank you, Councillor. I think that will probably be part of the strategic approach. So the strategy says where there aren't any toilets, where there are gaps that we've identified in the needs assessment. So we've looked at all the areas where there are toilets. We've engaged with people, and Abercecon and some other places we've been told there either aren't any facilities, or in some places there aren't enough facilities, as disabled people, for etc. And that's what the strategy will make us look at going forward. So we haven't got all the answers today, but our approach is what the Public Health Wales Act asks us to do as local authorities, is to look at alternative options where we can. Now that is going to be talking to people like community organisations or businesses. There's no financial incentive to give any of those. to open up their toilets. Some businesses may feel it's useful to participate in the national, because it's not just here, this is across Wales. They may feel it's beneficial to their business to have some footfall in, and the hope that people may spend a bit of money, whether they're a cafe or a restaurant or a shop, but there's nothing beholden on them, and there's no financial incentive we can give them to open those facilities. So as officers, we feel we will do what we can around this strategy, but there may be things, and yourselves as elected members, making those resources available when you know the budget pressures you have on every other part of the council. Those are difficult decisions for us all to make together. But, you know, we will as officers go out and we will talk to local businesses and organisations and see where we can increase the facilities that we currently have and fill some of those gaps. But we can't come back at the moment with any promises that businesses will work with us or other organisations to help that. And I'm going to guess that there's no extra money coming into Steve's team area to open any other that we ourselves as a council run or own. But, you know, we will work with you to see what we can do. And we will keep you informed as we go forward with businesses and come back to local councils, because, you know, you may have some contacts with businesses in your areas that would be an opening for us to go and talk to as local councillors, and we will try and work with you in the areas where we know there are some gaps.
Yeah, I can understand your feelings on that, because I've talked to a few businesses up there and they just don't want people in there, but I can understand the reason why. I got my own business. I wouldn't want people coming in using my toilets, because 90% of people, yeah, but you could have the toilet out of some people who just don't want to go in there at all. So I can understand but there is a toilet blocking up a second. If you could look at that, we'll reopen it.
Okay. Jess?
Thank you. Sorry about coming from somewhere else, so if I repeated anything, very sorry. Just a few points that I sort of have to read in the agenda. One was around play parks. So I know that this is going on to an app, but in particular there could be signage, because obviously, and then, you know, there's always scope for notice boards in play parks anyway, because there's lots of bored parents milling about. Around businesses, have we got any incentives for business to sign up to this? Obviously, you know, we haven't really got any money, but in terms of, you know, offering advertising, you know, on our social media channels, that kind of thing, just as, you know, a little perk to doing this. And the third one that I wanted to bring up was, I think we heard about the baby changing, and, you know, it's really positive that we're going to move towards having extra facilities, but in terms of supporting more inclusive toilets and baby change with businesses when we're doing new planning applications, I think that would be really positive, because we're going to need more and more of them.
What's that? Or you're just going to take note of those views, are you? Bob?
Yes, thank you. We've made a note of that, and we will look at those. Thank you.
There were some questions, observations over there. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. It's in regard to the national online mapping of toilet, which I welcome, but it's good it's going on the net, so to speak, but how will we get the people who are not able to access these services? Are we thinking of putting displays in the relevant areas?
I think that's something that we're going to have to work through again, as I say, you know, working with some of the third sector organisations, so Age Connects have said, and Torf Ein Mind and some of the others, that they will look at our online information and they will sort of print out for anybody that they know, so any of their customers and different people. We will need to look at extra signage, and that will be some sort of resource that we're going to have to consider around how that works. We're not sure that there's going to be any money from the Welsh Government around this national mapping. I think they do see it all as being online, and therefore, as you say, people who aren't able to access things online, there's going to be a problem. So we'll talk to organisations like our customer care and our libraries about where we can actually provide some hard copies as well.
I'm a little bit surprised, too, really, that it's not in the strategy in the beginning. A bit disappointed with that, because as you may well be aware, a lot of residents in my ward don't access these facilities.
Thank you for that. We'll make sure it goes in the final copy. Thank you.
Can I make an observation? I want to make an observation now. One is you haven't got, I was in there today, you haven't got Cwmbran railway station, there's a toilet in there. Number one. Number two is most of, as chair of allotments, most of the 44 allotments, if they haven't already, are trying to get earth closet toilets in there to make the allotments family friendly, because it's a very big problem. Some allotments are older, but they ain't getting families in there. In effect, they become public toilets in the allotment, and most of them are unisex. So that's an interesting development on allotments. There's 1,000 allotmenters in the borough, so it's a hell of a number of toilets facility there. I also want to make the observation that I think your colleague made about, and Stuart made, I think, was it Stuart when you made a point about unisex unisex toilets? If you've got a unisex toilet and it's a disabled toilet and you've got a child thing in there, it's in effect can be used by. I've been in some of those where you've got a drop-down child facility, so there's no problem for men or women to use it. That actually gets you around that problem. And if you've got a cafe facility, it's just got one. There's a few around cafe facilities with one a unisex facility, disabled facility. There's no problem about man accessing it. Then we've seen a few around the borough like that. I'll just make that facility because I used to run a community cafe at one time, and that was the way around that one.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the Pontypool, we've got the Civic Centre on there. How does that work? We've got security gates on now, so if somebody comes in, they've got to sign in. So how are you going to work that one?
This was something that was flagged up in engagement with people, particularly on Monday afternoon, because both the market and the library that have accessible toilets are both closed at the same time. So we have had that internal conversation about the accessible toilet, and only the accessible toilet on the ground floor level as you come in through the sort of sliding doors there. People will be able to use that, although previously they've directed people down to the toilet block. Being now aware of that issue, they're going to make that accessible toilet, which doesn't require going through security to get to. And obviously, as people will be using that, then reception team will be sort of vigilant on who's sort of coming and going, and trying to keep a bit of an eye on that.
Is that okay?
Not really, no. I mean, you say there's a team on the front being vigilant. I mean, they've got enough to do as it is without signing people in, and they come back from the toilet yet. I mean, the gates were put there for a reason. So one time the public were using the toilets upstairs all the time, and there were people being, their offices being robbed and different things going on. So I think you're going backwards there by letting the public in here. And the gates were there for a reason. But then if you let them through into our area, I wouldn't be happy with that.
Perhaps I could just come in at that point, Councillor Burnett. We put the security in for, obviously, because we had concerns in the building generally, with both members and our officers alike. I mean, part of this process is to look at how we can widen the accessibility, but in a controlled manner in which we can manage that. This is the draft of the strategy, and having these views is quite helpful for us to pick these up and take forward. So, very much welcome all members' views with this, but it does give us an extra food for thought around our existing security arrangements and how we engage with the public. But it's our aspiration as part of this strategy to enable as wide an access as we possibly can, because we've got an ageing community, and with ageing communities come myself the wrong side of 50 now. I know sometimes you've got to be in a certain area at a certain time, but it's just aiming to get at that point. But please, if other members have some critiques around how we could possibly get around this, that would be helpful as well.
Juliet?
I'm surprised, Chair, that you didn't mention, as a member of Cwmbran Community Council, about the various notice boards that there are around the town, and perhaps we could use those as some form of advertising for the town.
Thank you, Juliet. I don't mind mentioning that there are notice boards in Pontypool and Glanarvon and Crossy Killiog as well. And Pontypool.
And in Glenavon, Chair.
Yeah, just following on from Colette's point, other forms of, maybe where you can put signage sort of on public bins, that kind of thing, the sticker posters, places that you're going to see a lot of. Also, I don't know if it's been mentioned already, around the radar keys. I only learned quite recently that you can actually buy them, and I think perhaps it might be worth, in our accessible toilets, putting did you know that you can get them, and perhaps where you can go online and get them. Because I think, unless, a lot of people probably don't, especially elderly people.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on this point about signage, we mustn't forget that signage must also be accessible. So with things like large print, etc., because ageing population have lots of issues. And just turning to page 39, appendix 2, the local toilet strategy on a page. At the bottom there's a box about the strategy we'll seek to. The report quite rightly recognises that as a council we need to do more around accessible toilets. I think that should be spelled out in that final box because it's very important. It talks about gradually improving, but I do think accessible toilets, we recognise with demographic change, we've got an ageing population, and Lyndon, you've just referred to that yourself. I think that ought to be a specific reference in the document.
When you say accessible toilets, we've got about the changing places, which are more than accessible, if you like. So, do you mean just for disabled with handrails, or do you mean
more about
the larger
people with disabilities?
Well, the changing places are large facilities, and at the moment we only have one at Asda in our borough, and that's for people. It's got hoists. It's got a very large bench that will take an adult weight. So for an adult who needs changing facilities, and obviously that's open for anybody who's got a disability. Or do you mean the more general accessible with some wider doors and handrails?
I think, the wider one probably, yeah.
Yeah, we will add that in then, thank you.
Could we ensure that people are identify places where radar keys are accessible in all the public areas, in local community halls, etc., and in our own council facilities?
Just sort of in response to that and Councillor Powell's comment about the radar keys and availability of those, I have actually had queries from people about where to buy them. So I have identified those places, which includes Age Connect, Shop Mobility, Bush Healthcare and Cwmbran, as well as Argos, if you want to pay twice as much. And we've got that list, and we'll make that available on our website. We're also going to use those businesses, so when people buy the radar keys, they can, inform them exactly where the accessible toilets are, so people know actually there is an accessible toilet in Blaenavon, or, and I can visit that area, and I didn't really risk it before. So that information, will be available.
Brilliant. Thanks for your help.
Richard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not sure if we have actually moved on to consultation question 2, because we have been sort of flitting about a little bit. But I am a little concerned about the public perception that the toilet facilities in Pontypool are inadequate, considering the investment that the Community Council makes to keep the toilets on Hanbury Road open at a greater amount of time than this authority would be able to do. I understand that on a Monday the market is closed, and that therefore reduces the number of public toilets that the public receiver are open to the toilets on Hanbury Road. But I'm a little concerned about this perception, considering the commitment the Community Council has made to this facility.
Thank you, Richard. Comment on that?
That comment, I'm just checking with Stephen, sorry, before I answered you. The toilet block doesn't have an accessible toilet. so the wide door and the hoist or some help for so that comment is about it says that we'll do more to highlight the nearby availability of accessible toilets in relation to Pontypool, and that's what we're saying on a Monday afternoon when the library that's got an accessible toilet and the market when those are closed, and that was the comment about people being able to use the accessible toilet in this building on those afternoons. But we obviously need to make it clearer. We know what we mean. If you didn't read that, we wouldn't like to mislead people or whatever, so we'll make that clearer in the final document for you.
So it is the accessibility of the toilet and not necessarily an inadequate number of hours the toilet is open. Thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Evans and then Councillor Thomas, all right?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very brief question. I don't know if other members know a lot about radar keys, but I certainly don't. Are they returned after their use? Is there a deposit for the radar key? Could you give us a little bit of background about the radar keys?
The radar keys are part of a UK-wide national scheme. You can purchase them from a little over £3 within the borough. You can also order them from places, online from Amazon and the like. Once you have one, you just keep it, and you can, use that to get into disabled accessible toilets. And most of those accessible toilets in Torvine do use radar keys.
Thank you for that, Steve. Why I asked the question really is because some unscrupulous people are using the radar keys for the wrong purpose.
Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And the term wrong purpose brings my question to the forefront, I'm afraid. The question I have is about Cwmbran toilets, by the bus station. And I'm not sure whether officers know about it, but it is being used quite regular for extra activities in a more sexual nature. I'm just wondering whether something could be done about that, because it's quite embarrassing when you go to the toilet and there's either someone in there up to no good, or there's things left in there that your kids don't really want to see. Hopefully, I'm hoping that other people have noticed this as well, otherwise it's just going to look like I'm going in there looking around.
Sorry, Councillor Thomas, is that owned by Cwmbran Shopping? Yeah. I'm just trying to understand with you.
Cwmbran Shopping.
It's on the list, yeah.
By the bus station.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure who owns what. I can pick that up with our community safety team for you, by all means. And through the community safety team, we can work with the owners of the toilet to bring that to attention. It certainly hasn't crossed my path before. Obviously, if it's
I'm glad you said it's well known, because otherwise it does look like I'm going in there, and and that's not good for me.
Are you happy? Are you happy for me to pick that up with our community safety team and the owners of the block?
Yeah, as long as I haven't got to go on a field trip or anything, that's fine.
Well, as long as we agree I don't have to go as well, I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, could we move on that? It is an issue, and it's a safe. Can I just say, Lyndon, that is Cwmbran Shopping, that one, and it is an issue. Dave, thank you for bringing it up, because that is an issue in a lot of them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty brave of me, actually, considering no one else was saying it.
No, you are bringing up a very real issue. It's not just that, Lou, unfortunately. Could we go on to the next issue on the question number 3, just to help people along a bit, because we are jumping around a little bit. We do have a set of questions here. The question number 3 is, how will these actions improve access in toilets in most areas of Torvine? We've done that, unless you want to do a bit more. Thank you, Dave. How will we work with other public services and private businesses to support improved access to toilets? Have we done that? Anybody? Yeah, right.
Liz, go on.
Go on, Liz.
How did you choose who you were going to contact in relation to businesses, etc.? At the moment, we haven't contacted businesses. We had a few years ago, Welsh Government gave a small grant that we could offer, and we used our business economic officers to send out some information to businesses across the borough, because that wasn't my network. It went out on our behalf, and we only had 2 businesses that contacted us. The post office at Glenavon and one of the pubs at the bottom of New Inn, neither of which continued after 12 months. They decided that they didn't want to participate in the scheme, and I think that was more about they didn't feel that many people went in to use their facilities rather than any misuse of the facilities. So we haven't been offering that money. That grant finished, and what we're saying is, as part of the strategy, we will work with our colleagues in business economic development around identifying businesses, and as I said earlier, perhaps yourselves as local councillors could also help us about any businesses that we could approach within your ward areas that we could approach and start to work with.
Just, can I come back on that then, please? So we have a list of privately owned here on all of these sheets that are at the discretion of the owners. How do we know that these will all participate? If this is forming part of the strategy and we are here today, surely they should have been contacted first to make sure that they are continuing to want to participate.
The ones that you have are the current people who open their toilets, so they're current providers of toilets, and they have been checked, I think, haven't they, that they are.
Yeah, so those maps were produced solely for the purpose of this session. I mapped on there with the numbers, the ones that are sort of local authority owned, the ones that we know to be available to anybody to use, and then the sort of second list on there details some of the other places like your garages, the supermarkets, those other businesses that we will contact as part of the scheme, so they're not actually sort of mentioned in the draft strategy and won't be at this stage in terms of any names of any of those businesses in there. So they're the kind of people that we will speak to once the strategy is published, throughout 2019, and look to sort of publicise their facilities if they agree, and also to this sort of new signage that comes from Welsh Government, that will be available then in form of an A5 sticker to put in their doorway or window, to allow people to feel confident about going in and using those toilets and to feel welcome. And they would then also be included at if they wish to be on the national map.
So for clarity, the data that we've been given on here is based on a few years ago when there was some funding available. That's not been checked now. What I'm suggesting is that before the strategy is written, that we get a list of those businesses that are willing to participate now, as opposed to the list that we've been supplied based on previous data. I think writing a strategy and then doing who's going to be included from local businesses is a bit backwards to me. It's the wrong way around. I'd like to see that included in the strategy and the work being done before the strategy and is built. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we will see what time we've got and how many businesses we can get around before we plate the strategy. But part of the strategy, the strategic approach, will be to try and work with businesses going forward. And if we can't, there won't be any money, depending on what incentives and to how much of a conversation. That can be quite a lengthy process. I think probably what we have done is, where we know that there are already organisations who are open to the public, we've listed those, but as I say, they haven't agreed to be part of the national scheme and display the logo at the moment. So apologies if we've misled you in that way at this stage, but the strategy we will, when that goes, and it has to be published by the 31st of May, so whoever is part of any organisation at that point, we will be able to publish as being available, but we will continue to work with other organisations and businesses as best we can going forward and add those to the mappings and the lists as we go. And that's where I said publishing leaflets can often be out of date quite quickly because people join or defer from any scheme like that.
I agree with you with the leaflets. They're very, very quickly out of date, but we do have a really good communications team in Torfaen Council. Maybe those businesses and privately owned premises can be contacted that way. I know it excludes those that don't, but you know, we are where we are with money, and we do have a really good communication team, so it doesn't cost an awful lot to do that. Thank you anyway.
Thank you, Liz. That's a good point there. Nick?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is going back a little bit. Sorry, I was trying to get your attention for a while. Richard brought up a very good point about Pontypool Community Council. And I think it's perhaps gone past note that we actually supply probably about 25% of the funding for toilets within Torfaen anyway. Have we approached the other district council, so the other community councils, because a similar sort of contribution from them might allow us to reopen some of our closed toilets?
What happened back in 2015, the council had a proposal put to it to look at closing public toilets across the borough, and at that point in time, myself and a number of other officers, the chief officer at the time, went to all of the community councils and had discussions with Blenavon, Cwmbran, Pentlas. The outcome of that was Pontypool were very supportive, and they very much valued the Hanbury Road toilet blocks and fund that to the tune of £12,500 a year on an annual basis. It's not an unlimited commitment, it's an annual basis, they review it, but that has enabled those toilets to continue. We had similar discussions with the others, obviously Cwmbran, with Cwmbran Shopping funding most of the facilities in Cwmbran, the largest portion. The Community Council, there wasn't, other than building new facilities, there wasn't a requirement so much. We had different discussions with Blenavon Community Council about different avenues that they would work with the council to support to enhance facilities. Toilets was amongst them, but we haven't really sort of progressed that because there's not the same level of facilities up there, so that public toilet itself was sort of not on the same level of consideration because Pontypool's got more of a concentration, if you like. So Hanbury Road could have been, as an older building, an older toilet, could have been perhaps closed, whereas Blenavon, there's less of a facility up there. So, you know, it was balancing those up and prioritising, but we can certainly continue to have those discussions, and I know that our colleagues in Environment and our colleagues in the economy area are looking to continue to build those relations with the community councils to look at how we can fill those gaps and bring those funding opportunities together.
Yes, thank you for that as a reply. Maybe I could encourage, I believe that there's a number of members in this chamber who sit on these community councils. Maybe we could encourage them to have or to bring this up as a subject on budgeting when it comes around.
As chair, I'm also the deputy leader of Cwmbran Community Council. Our toilet's actually available to any member of the public when it's open to use anyway. But I can certainly, for the badging scheme, we can put it on there. It's a very good idea. Thank you.
I think we should point out that the Blenavon toilets were funded by Blenavon Town Community Council.
Chair, you're next.
Thinking of changing places, and it says in the report about the grants, external grants that are available. Can you give us some more information about them, please? And also, what are we doing to let our external organisations know that there is funding available? Bottom of page 28, it says that there's external funding and, yeah.
I think looking at that, Councillor Gordon, that's around the council working within colleagues within the council and with third sector agencies that should funding become available, external funding become available, that we will, as part of the strategy, encourage that activity. Part of Stephen's role in our unit is to look at policy and partnerships, and that's one area that Stephen will have an eye on in attracting what grant facility is available from other organisations, whether that's Welsh Government or whether it comes from other areas. It's a statement in it to ensure that if there are funding opportunities there, we will look at that as part of the strategy.
Right, any more? Shall we get to the next item on this? Sorry. Oh, sorry, Hugh, sorry, I didn't miss you, did I?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Question, I guess it comes under this general heading. Part of the consultation process, we've had feedback highlighting issues and concerns over public facilities with commuters. But I noticed in the report it says that this will be considered in the overall strategy in 2021. So my question is, why is this not being looked at now? Why is this effectively being deferred for another 2 years? It's on page 31 of the report.
I think it says 2021 because we have to review the strategy 2 years after we publish. So we published 2019, it needs to be reviewed in 2021. And so I think we will be saying there about what information we can do between now and then, that we may get businesses coming forward, we may fill some of those gaps. And so come 2021, it was making reference to the fact that we will then have to review what is available. Again, if that's not clear, we'll make sure that is clearer for the final document.
Thank you there. You come back
supplementary on that, Chair. No, it's not clear because the report actually states issues that have been raised in connection to commuting will be looked at when the strategy is reviewed in 2021. So are you contradicting that? You're saying it's going to be looked at earlier.
I think, Councillor, it's a confusing paragraph. I think you're right to point it out. I think it's part of the process now, and the strategy will be reviewed. Once it's published in 2019, we will review the whole strategy again in 2021. So I think we've confused, you quite rightly pointing it out. If it's reading confusing to you, it's going to be confusing to others, and being embedded in this, it's easy for us to pick that up, so I think we can rephrase that paragraph when we bring it back through. I think you're right.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Just for clarification then.
Hugh, can I ask what you mean by commuters? Because the only commuting toilets that I can think of would be something that's stated in the railway station. Says already one in Cumbrahan Station. There isn't one in Pontypool railway station. Is that what you mean?
Thanks, Chair. You just kind of preempted my next question, really, because I was going to say, well, what are the issues? It does specifically use the word commuting in the report, and I was going to ask what further issues have been highlighted with the commuting, and what engagement is going to be done. You mentioned there's going to be engagement with businesses, but perhaps if you could elaborate a bit more with regards to that particular area, please.
I think by commuting they mean the rail network, the bus network and the road network. So, where we know that there are garages that open, like there are garages on the, what I would call the Harvester or the McDonald's roundabout. We've got one of the garages as you come down just above Pontypool here. Are there any further places? As I say, bus stations, the bus stops here, the bus stops at Cumbrahan. So there is quite a bit of work, and how do we actually speak to the people who use those routes? And do we look at workforces to do some questionnaire? Do we do something on social media? So I think we've had some comments about commuting, but not very many through engagement. It's mostly been questions similar to what this panel has brought up already about the facilities, about disabilities, about different locations, but the commuters themselves haven't yet said anything, so we do need to do a bit of work to think about how we... So my confusion probably around that paragraph is about, we've got some information now, we will do what we can to fill the gaps, and then when we look at, we've got those maps out, we're publishing what toilets are available, commuters may come up with further information that particularly affect them as travellers, so, and then we would be gathering that information and doing that as part of a review in 2021, so I'll make that a lot clearer going forward in the final strategy. Thank you for raising that though, because it's helped me to think that through as well, actually, that having that bit of conversation with you.
Well, I raised the commuting one. Why isn't there one on Pontypool Station?
Stuart? There's also a concern with the commuters using the Glenavon to Pontypool bus route because the terminus at Advarsfield Hill. So that's concerns as well.
Yeah. Okay, can we go on to the next question, and if you think of anything else in the meanwhile? Which next question is, 5 is, will the national and local maps support and improve access to toilets? Which sort of brings that in as well, doesn't it? Anything else on that particular question? This question is sort of pertinent to some. Which 6 is, how will we improve information and access to toilets? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was wondering whether there could be some sort of geo-tagging or something like that in terms of enabling new online technologies. I don't know, promoting locations with things such as Google Maps and local town maps, you know, that are available online, so that you could have most people now have got a smartphone, whether or not they have computers at home, and it's possible to do quick searches on a number of these applications to find the nearest garage or the nearest McDonald's or whatever. Can we look at, as part of the strategy, in including that information to be online, that people can do an online search on their phone to find out where the nearest public convenience facilities are?
Thank you, Councillor. We'll work with our own GPS colleagues that work here about mapping. We'll also raise that with the Welsh Government team that are doing this national mapping, because we've all been asked to feed our information into to them, what they're going to do with that and how they're going to produce that. We will raise the question. Thank you.
Any more? Any questions here? Okay. We've got 2 more questions here. Question number 7. Shall we explore ways to improve signage to toilets the local authority provides? How will we encourage other organisations and private businesses to display these signs? That's not toilets, that's actually signs. Any observations on that one? Oh, well. And the last question, Colette?
On the Cwmbran toilets, we've got on the sheet, number 9, Blue Celyn Cemetery, Blue Celyn Drive. It's actually Hollybush Way, the address. And I just wondered about the signage there, because the toilet block is quite away from some of the grave sides there. And I wondered whether perhaps we could look at the signage at the sort of entrance to the site rather than on the toilet, on the office block, which is now empty itself.
Yeah, so if there's some confusion to me internally within the cemetery, that's something we could look to clarify, just to make it easy for users of that cemetery, of course.
Thank you there. Any more before I move? Jason?
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea for shops or things to maybe set up some kind of scheme that they could put on the front of their buildings that would allow members of the public to see that there's a public toilet inside they could use, in much the same whereas Dementia Friends have a scheme, and you can see that they've gone through the relevant training to have some kind of a public awareness programme that people can sign up to. And part of social good conscience that businesses are obliged to do. I think that can be part of it.
Thank you. Yeah, and that is part of this scheme, and Stephen referred to the national logo that's in the draft strategy. So we will be issued with stickers around that, which we will, as we talk to businesses and different organisations, be encouraged to display them, as I say, on the doors or windows, so that members of the public. And, when we've been doing our engagement, people have been telling us that actually that would be very helpful, because they don't like having to go in and ask the person behind the counter, can I use your toilet? Whereas if that was on the door and they knew that business was open to them going in, then they would feel a lot more comfortable at doing that.
Have you got a sample of the sort of toilet mark or the bog mark, whatever it is? I'm sorry to be... Well, bog standard, I actually was going to say.
At the moment, there are those organisations that took part in the scheme that I referred to with Councillor Haynes about, we were giving some money out. That came from the older people strategy, and it's a man and a lady, and they've both got their hands crossed across their groin. They changed that at Welsh Government, and it will now be this toilet symbol that's on your strategy on a page. So that will be the national symbol that people are encouraged to display.
Right, so everybody's got the idea of what it looks like. Can you get that for members so we can put it on the internet? They've got an idea of what it looks like. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, and is it in colour, the one they're going to do? Because that's the thing it sticks. I'm sorry about the bog standard gag, but it did get you a lot of weight, didn't it? Thank you. Right, thank you for that. We all got that. There's going to be a toilet mark. Thank you. Right, anything more on that one? I'm going to wake people up, 8. This is the last one. What environmental considerations will have an impact? This is our subject, Hugh. And how will they encourage and promote gender-neutral provision? There we are, we're back on that one again. Okay. Alan?
Thank you, Chair. The paragraph above the question there kind of infers that, it actually says, developers seeking planning approval should carefully consider. Are we going to make the provision of gender-neutral toilets a planning consideration? So would we turn down a planning application if the applicant didn't or wasn't considering gender-neutral provision, or environmental considerations for that matter?
That's a conversation we're having with our planning colleagues. There is a feeling that gender-neutral provision will become law at some point, probably in the nearer future. And so therefore would we be ahead of the game by having those conversations and talking to our planning colleagues about that going in. And it may be that when we come to this strategy now that doesn't appear, but it does appear in a next version. I'm just waiting for planning colleagues to sort of give us their view on that. And to, we don't want to make it so that, as you say, permission is turned down for a wider planning, but it would be part of considerations going forward, maybe that how favourably they would be looked at.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment really regarding the environmental considerations. Surprised we haven't looked at it before really in regard to the power usage with the use of solar powered lighting and what have you, and the flush system, which are quite easy to install.
Any more on this? Jess?
Yeah, just around the gender neutral issue actually. Because obviously, like you said, my view is that that's the way legislation will go, and anything we can do to do that. But also around, I think it came out quite clearly in the consultation that it's, even though there's a lot of controversy over the issue at a national level, it's actually very important in Torfaen with an ageing population that if you've got elderly parents, for example, out with children, we're now middle-aged, to help them go to the toilet. And I think that we should promote that view that it's not just a sort of LGBTQ issue, that, actually is very important for all users.
Hugh?
Yeah, I don't want to get too drawn into the issue of gender, but I think we should really await statutory guidance on that, because I'm somewhat old-fashioned, and I was shocked to learn that on Facebook now apparently there are over 51 different definitions of gender. So we can't obviously have a public service offering where we've got 51 different toilets open at every site. So I think we have to... No, this is a serious thing. I think we have to be led by the statutory guidance coming from the Welsh Government. If there's a gender mutual toilet provision that comes in that all local authorities may have to introduce as a statute, then so be it. But obviously there's got to be sensible guidelines drawn up surrounding that.
I'm just going to make the observation, if you have one toilet with one lock on it and it says toilet, and you have a bank of them, you don't actually, as long as you've got a lock on it, you don't need to make any observation. And that's been happening on the continent for years. It is just here that we have male and female. I will also make the other observation, a lot of allotments in other places, I'm going to make an environmental observation now, a lot of toilets now are not using water, and we pioneered it on a lot of Torfaen allotments now, that they're actually having toilets that operate and other things other than water. And bearing in mind the global warming things at the moment, there is no real need to use water. There are other ways of doing it. There's earth closet toilets, there's all sorts of things. The sooner we get away from having dumped loads of water down allotments, down toilets, the better. And that's something we should be looking at. And Alan's having a smile at me at the moment because he knows I'm making this. The water closet's very effective. Incredibly effective, but you don't need to put gallons and gallons of water down it. There are other methodologies. And the reason why allotments have gone down the line to not using a lot of water is simply because you can't put plumbing on a lot of allotments, so they've had to come up with other ways of doing it. And somebody said about community I think your colleague said about what community councils funded, combined community councils funded to be with these things, coming at £1,000 a go, and they're very effective. So, alternatives to mains water is quite interesting.
Yeah, on that point, Chair, the composting toilets might be an idea for the allotments, but I don't think composting toilets would really work in town centres where you get such a huge throughput of people. But I take your point, and there is a legitimate point in there in terms of quantities of water, because as Jess mentioned earlier, you can have short flush cisterns. So it's whether we should consider the introduction of water economy by having a short flush and a long flush option, as they do on the continent.
Thank you, Hugh, for that. The other thing I always make is some people, my other favourite subject's going to come up now, people are saying opening up our countryside, parks and the canal bank, with access to loos, there's another alternative for you, and green spaces in the borough.
I just thought about it when we were talking about the actual allotment toilets. I actually went to open some of them last year. But the point was that the funding didn't come from us. The funding came from various other places. So Big Lottery did the allotment ones, and I went to a community one that I think Mellon had funded. So perhaps we can look at that when we're trying to engage businesses and community halls, that they would be, they could get funding to actually make their toilets more accessible, and perhaps to do something else in the hall as well for benefit for their users.
The other Mr. Evans.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
When you mentioned locked toilets, the thing I find, which is going to be quite difficult to police, is when people are disabled and they got these radar keys, they find it very difficult to get into these toilets because people who are not disabled are using them and acquiring keys, and also they'll be used by individuals to do illicit deals from.
So how are we going to police this gender-neutral toilet with locks on?
Very interesting question, Councillor Evans, one of which I am going to answer to hand.
You better find out.
I think part of that, I mean, that will be an interesting question to come back and note, and I can perhaps take that forward and have a look and come back with a written response to all members in the same way we would normally. Again, if we got suspicions around that happening, as mentioned to Councillor Thomas, we can engage with the right people and try to get an answer back to members. But in terms of gender-neutral toilets and locking them and policing those, that's going to be very difficult.
Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, everyone's looking scared now. Just on the point of gender-neutral toilets, I actually think they're quite dangerous, or they will be in the future, with individuals that pop into these toilets and do some, again, bad things, but to the opposite sex. So I think we're going to be opening the doors to some really uncomfortable and dodgy stories in the future if we go forward with these crazy ideas.
I'm not sure. Can we just, anybody else with any other observations on the environmental stroke gender neutral provision? Right, thank you, Dave. Anybody on general observations to wrap this up? Alan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I should have perhaps asked this at the start. I think it's page 20 where you're talking about population. I just wondered, I mean, it says the population of Torwine is 92,000, 92,000 odd, and that the ratio of toilets should be 1 cubicle per 550 females, etc. We haven't got the number there, sort of what we might expect, what number of toilets we might expect in an authority of this size. That was my only point. We've got a list of how many toilets we have, but how many should we have?
That's a very interesting question. Who wants to answer that one?
Thank you, Councillor. We'll do the sums and we'll put something in the final strategy, or let members know if that's helpful. I think we probably, we just need to do the sums and have a look at it. What I think we need to be careful of is that we don't have such a high number that it will be impossible for us to reach, and that we set unrealistic targets. But we will have a look. I know you'll have a view on that. I can hear the answer already.
Alan, you're coming back, aren't you?
I am. I mean, if you've got a ratio and you've got a certain number of people, it's not about whether you can massage the figures. Surely it is just one divided by the other. In terms of Torwine, I've worked it out already. We should have 86 cubicles for ladies and 41 cubicles for men.
You're an intelligent engineer.
Well, I just thought it might, you know, it's a kind of expectation management. Thank you.
You all right with that, Sue? Thank you. Councillor Evans? Janet, sorry. Over there. Sorry, Stuart.
Just going on to what Alan said, actually, we forget that we are an area with high tourism, especially in World Heritage Towns of Blenavon. That has to be taken into effect, that you get quite a large input of tourism, a couple of millions in a year.
You're right, actually.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, there is something about tourism in the guidance, and we'll take another look at that and make sure that we cover that as well.
Thank you.
Norma?
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to Alan's point, which it is a really good point. It isn't always how many facilities we've got, but where they're situated. Because a lot of them, yes, it's good for the place they're in, but not for people generally out shopping or in the parks and that sort of thing. They need to be in the right positions, in a convenient position.
Yeah. Thank you. I
think that's what the strategy that's the note of the strategy really, is to make sure that we do look at the gaps and do what we can to fill them. It will come down to resources and trying to work with other organisations as well as ourselves. And as I said, that's going to be the strategic position going forward. Thank you.
I think Hugh wants to have the last word, don't you?
No, you always get the last word, Chair. Just a very quick point on the point that was a very good point that was raised by my colleague at the back there in terms of numbers and whether he feels it should be simply a matter of mathematical division, one number divided by another. The ratio that's set out, numbers of toilet provision per capita, is that a recommendation or is that a statutory figure? Because if it's a statutory figure and there is a shortfall, and I'm making an assumption there's a shortfall versus the number of actual toilets we've got versus the number that we should be providing, then if it's a statutory provision, then obviously it begs the question that funding has to be found to make that extra provision, and it's not acceptable just to say, oh, we've asked for funding in the past and it hasn't been forthcoming.
I think we want to go back and research that before we give you a definitive answer on that. My colleagues just passed me on page 21, it talks about the British Toilet Association making recommendations. So that's one agency. And picking up on Councillor Slade's comment as well. It would benefit perhaps if we just go back and have a little look at that and then come back to you as members, and that's the beauty of these sessions, because we do get your comments and views and thoughts coming through that will only strengthen this document rather than weaken it, so that's helpful. But I'm very reluctant to say yes or no to statutory unless I've seen it myself.
Right, everybody happy with that? But Steve, have the last word.
My question is, if we hold events or certain things going on within Torvine, would we be looking to bring in these portable ones? And if so, could we use them long term? And if there are any problems with these toilets being vandalised, whatever, we remove them and tell the communities why.
Thank you, Councillor. There is something, in the guidance about events and bringing in, and there's ratios about how many you should have. So, again, when I've talked to Neil Jones about putting on the big event or something, he felt that he already knew those figures and that they take notice of that. The issue around using portable toilets, we'll talk to colleagues and consider that as part of things going forward. Or do you have a view, Jo?
Yeah, obviously the maintenance and the higher costs of those type of facilities. The strategy as it's been laid out is to look at improving what we've got and taking advantage of any funding options that come along. But it's very much not about growing the facility. So potentially that would be quite a considerable revenue budget consideration that councillors would need to discuss.
Rather than actually looking to rent them, can we think about proposing to buy some so we actually own them?
Of course, yeah, but the maintenance with the chemicals and so on, and the actual cost of purchasing them, replacing them, dealing with vandalism, the very nature of them is that they're temporary and obviously not sturdy enough really for a longer term usage.
Finish, Steve?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. It just came to my mind, as is when I was away last week down at Torquay and into Brixham, and a year ago, they're the most disgusting toilets you've ever seen in your life. I come out, bad. And I said, oh, Guy, they said no, and they really... And this year, it's 30 pence to go in there. And they're unisex now, spotlessly clean, but I walked away at 30 pence. Because I knew it was a free one down the road. But yeah, jokingly aside, but it is 30 pence now. Remember what ladies used to have to pay a penny, didn't they? But the gents didn't, but now it's 30 pence for everybody. And those toilets, absolutely pristine. But they paid and they are maintained.
Stuart Evans, you want to say something? Can we not go on about cost of toilets in Brixham?
Because it's on the back of the toilets from Brixton, actually, Chair. Have we considered anything of charging in future? I know it's not a subject that's going to be very acceptable from the funding aspect, but long term it could resolve a lot of problems along the way.
It's not something that's obviously been policy in the council, but I think where you're looking at, London, very heavy tourist populations and very heavy sort of holiday destinations, the revenue investment of the staff to be on site, because you'd obviously need that, you'd need the facility to take the payment and so on, the actual overhead and mechanism of doing that, you do need to make sure that you've got a really robust business case to ensure that, A, people are going to pay, everybody agrees with the policy that you pay, and obviously that in itself can cause accessibility issues, and then that it's going to pay its way in terms of what the cost of running it in the first place is. That overhead is quite considerable. Although, like you say, the actual quality of toilet that you can is very different because of that investment.
I wondered if there was opportunity to just pilot one toilet in the borough to see how it went.
Aaron? I was just going to raise the same question about piloting perhaps a paid-for-use toilet. I think to not consider it in the report, I think, is a real omission. To be fair.
Could I add a little rider on this? Because I remember Cwmbran Community Council about 15 years ago looking at this, and we looked at the idea in one of the places in Cwmbran, one of those toilets at Newport had, in the bus station, the magic toilet, and where it cleans itself. They're enormously expensive, the installation of one of those things. Is it 100,000 or something like that? They're a lot of money. On them, people are very unpopular, as far as I understand.
Just on that point, Chair, I think some of the unpopularity of those resulted from people getting accidentally trapped inside them when they went on to the cleaning mode and getting covered in chemicals. So I wouldn't advocate adoption of one of those in Torvine.
Come back on that at all, about that possibility of trialling or not? I mean, it's...
Formulate an answer at the moment.
Members are obviously interested in this, and Jan,
there's also the added incentive. If we did charge, you could afford, the maintenance would be better, and perhaps you could end up affording to have an attendant which would closely monitor the facilities.
Yeah, of course, and that is the basis of it, isn't it? And what I was going to say was, in order to pilot it, it would be a matter of Steve looking at his staff and looking to actually divert staff from existing duties into that sort of 100% management of a toilet role. But obviously it would be something that Cabinet would need to consider, because there's quite a big policy implication there to pilot something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, but it could have its uses as well, and obviously cut down on the antisocial behaviour and vandalism.
Then?
I think if you're looking at charging to go into toilets, I think you're going to end up like the tip. You're going to get people fly tipping all over the area, and I think these people are not going to go into the toilet, they're going to do it elsewhere. But the other point is, you think about it logically, because once they started charging down that tip, up my area, and probably every area in here, there's fly tipping every day. Every day somebody's coming on. I reported a pile yesterday. I think if things are free, people will use them. But you even put 20 pence on a toilet. I know what people are like out there. They just go around the corner and go to the back of the toilet. But my other point is, where are you looking for funding? I see in there you can ask for funding. Any idea where you're going to try and get the funding from?
I know that there's something called the intermediate care funding that Welsh Government gives out around social care, and Torvine Leisure did put in an application this year for changing to improve their toilets at the leisure centre here in the park, and also to put one of the large changing places toilets there. They were turned down, but the panel felt it was a good application. It just wasn't the quality of the application. They hadn't thought it through properly. Other parts of Wales have been able to draw down some funding to do that. So I've said that I will work with Anne Howard-Collins at Torfaen Leisure Trust around putting in an application. And there may be other things like Councillor Powell alluded to around big lottery and other things. And that's something that we just need to spend. I think because this guidance came out, and on top of other things, we've done what we can in the time, and so part of the strategy will be looking at other sources of funding, what can we do to help businesses, communities, as well as our own provision about developing things going forward. Does that help?
Thank you. Sue, can I just add something in there? Because I sense there's some people like the idea of pilot, but the vast majority of people are not overtly keen on charging. Am I getting that feel? Yeah? The only authority I know in Wales that charges, and I might be wrong, is Pembrokeshire, because I've been there. And Palace? Yeah? Other than that, English authorities, I've been to Cornwall, and I think Devon charge, but it's not popular with a lot of punters, I can assure you. Brixham's in Devon, if you go there. And you've got the problem, if you charge, you get people outside, but you're not necessarily brilliant toilets if you go to them. And I'm only saying I'm sensing a feel about this. I can ask Sue if she can look at the implications of that, because there are implications, and I think Lynn brought it up beautifully just now. The implications are that kind of fly tipping. You said it well there, Lynn. So there are implications about it. There are the implications that all councils that charge get that problem about. You can pay for more services, but then you've got the problem that people resent it.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Sue.
I just wanted to make an observation, actually. We spent about an hour and a half now talking about the toilet policy. Now, looking at this actual report, I understand looking at it, we maintain 5 facilities. In comparison to what the private sector actually supply for us, we provide very little toileting here in Torfaen. Surely if we are talking about putting any form of charging in, then all that's going to happen is that we're going to put a lot of pressure on the private sector. That's my first observation. The second observation is that quite clearly we haven't got enough provision here in Torfaen. So if we are going to be talking about doing anything of a pilot, maybe it would be a good idea to identify a place where we're in desperate need of toilets, build them, operate them, and then consider putting a charge in to pay for it. Then people might be quite happy to go forward on that basis. But otherwise, we spent a lot of time talking about a policy which deals with the private sector. And I think we need to spend a lot more time talking to them about how they feel if we start putting signs on all of their toilets about the possibility of them closing them to the public. So just an observation on that.
Thank you, Chair. With a conversation going on with the possibility of ideas of charge and go to the toilet, I was quite surprised that no members in this room or anyone else have a thought of the community, families, would they be able to afford this?
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if it's worth exploring the authorities that are charging to see how they manage it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually I've done a paper over the last 2 years. It's a snapshot survey of all councils, and included within that is a table of charging and revenue and so on. So I'll work with colleagues and we'll be able to pull some data together around that for you.
Steve up there.
I don't think anyone's suggesting every single toilet in Torfaen should be chargeable, but I think where we're lacking provision, perhaps it's an option if we want to increase it. Or where there's a problem with vandalism and we're thinking of closing toilets, then maybe it's an option to keep that toilet open. I think that's where I'm coming from. Yeah. I'm not suggesting we charge for every single toilet. I mean, see? That was it.
My question is, it might be, you can take it whatever you want. Can we look for sponsorship, perhaps from toilet roll manufacturers or cleaning people? I mean, we should be looking to the market to see if we can get any sponsorship to help with these toilet things.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else? Richard?
Just an observation, Mr. Chairman. I'm surprised that we consider that only a minority of authorities in the UK are charging for toilets, because my recollection of using older toilets in any town or city in the United Kingdom, that older toilets, perhaps the age of the toilets on Hanbury Road, my recollection is that when you order them to use a cubicle, it is coin operated. So I'm surprised that we consider that very few authorities charge, because historically I think most authorities charged to use a cubicle. Using urinal, no, there was no charge, but as you say, you have to put your tuppence or whatever into the slot to use a cubicle.
Yeah, and that was the case, and I certainly remember that myself. But I think, particularly in Wales, the way that it's come to being is that the maintenance of those mechanisms has become quite outdated, and so the actual cost of replacing and maintaining and keeping that going was felt to be not viable with the ongoing cost compared to the income that was coming in. But you've already said, members, there's other advantages in that it can prevent vandalism, but it can also prevent accessibility, particularly disabled and people with children, where you're trying to scrabble around for your 20p and your child's already wet themselves. I'm sure we've all been in that situation before. So, there are, I think that's what it is really. It's the revenue versus what you're getting in, the cost overhead.
Right,
thank you very much.
Norma and Peter the last, and I think we better knock it on the head. We've got to get some recommendations after that.
Okay. I was only going to suggest, Chairman, because you weren't sure of how many members are willing to have, a paying toilet somewhere, just to see. Ask for a show of hands, give the different questions, and ask for a show of hands, and then you'd know.
A paying toilet would be useful. Could you put your hands up? Those who were virulently against it.
Sorry, Chair. Can we also ask if we felt that if we could build new facilities, as to whether that could be on a paying basis?
Silence a minute, please. I can't hear. Nick, Nick's asked the question, if we were to build new facilities, would they pay? I think that's a reasonable proposition. Can we have that, if we were to build new facilities on a pay basis, those would be in favour of that being pay? To fund it, yeah. New facilities. But those who are against that being paid for? Well, I'm not putting my hand up on any of this, admittedly. Right, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just get, I'm not sure that this is the committee today have been asked to review the strategy as it is, not with regards to, am I right?
No,
not in terms of opening new facilities?
Just to get a
so I'm worried that we're going down the wrong route.
That's just... I'm going to... the people that put their hands up, Peter, did you want to say something before I wrap this up?
No, you've dealt with that now, Stuart, thank you.
Right. I'm going to knock this on the head now, because we've got... I'd like to sort of do some concluding things. Would you like to sum officer selectors as sum up your views, or just the ones that started this off? Does anyone want to say anything down there at all, other than that?
Have you got more there? Just to thank members for your time this afternoon and the discussion and questions. It's obviously a very key concern to members, the toilets that we provide in Torv Island and the facilities available to it. So I just want to thank the members for their time and helpful contributions that we'll now feed into this draft strategy. It's still draft. And we'll bring that, your views, into the document. We'll also work with our colleagues in Neighbourhood Services to respond to some of the questions that you've also come back with us today. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to say anything to us, Steve? Anybody? You all come away with it. Right, thank you very much indeed. We're going to just sum up and get... Thank you, Sue, by the way. You go up there. Thank you. You may go... Could we... are you all going now? Break until after discussing all this? It won't be long. So we've got to get some recommendations before you all go. While the officers get out. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Brilliant. I'd like to thank members. That's been quite lively. We've gone off a little bit there. Could we... Thank you. We've gone off a little bit there, but I think that was quite useful. Thank you for your contributions. It's been quite lively. I went a bit off-piste in the beginning as well, but... No, I think it was... I think we've got strong views and we could go up there, but I'd get to... bring back to go off and give us a read back as to what you said and what you thought that you strongly held views, and see if that's what you want as recommendations, all right?
Thank you, Chair. So if I can just remind you of the scrutiny activity for this item. Members have been asked to offer their views on the consultation process undertaken to date, and also to review the content of the draft strategy and determine if it provides sufficient information on current provision, extending provision, including resource implications, and actions the Council will take should there be any indication of future reduction, change to provision. So, before I go through any notes that I've made, have members got any recommendations they'd like to put forward?
Yeah, I think the option of paid-for toilets should be included, even if it's just considered. But I think it is in the mission not to consider it at all.
Are all members happy for that to be put forward as a consideration, that the potential for that to be looked at?
I'm suggesting that not all members are happy with that.
No.
So,
it's a majority, but there is also a sizable minority against it on the basis of affordability. Is that right? You were not happy about it. I understand that as well. I think I think it's because I get the view. The reason it's for is because we get toilets vandalised, and that's why the provision's not there. Okay.
My argument is if you've got 3 or 4 children, and there's only that toilet available, and she has to say £1.20, and that's how if she can't afford it.
No.
If I can just come in there as well, I will just remind members that Joe Lewis, who deals with finances, did state clearly that it will have a significant cost implication to run such a pilot. Yeah. And members will be aware you have been sent the budget papers today where it sets out a lot of the mitigations going forward. So that does need to be a serious consideration for you, that the budget implication of running such a pilot in the first place.
Consider it, not necessarily, can we just get back to...
Consider it.
It's all considerations. Is that the opposite? Come on, it's at the end of the day, we've spent nearly 2 hours. Who can believe what we spent 2 hours talking about? We got the officers there, and it's just to us. Just put some consideration. Let them consider it. They'll know whether it's feasible or whether it's not feasible. They know what they're doing. We're here just to try and put some ideas to them. And again, it's all for the residents. And we know we're never going to build any new ones. And we've got the budget seminar next week. We know what's going to happen through that. So how can we talk about putting a new toilets in unless they're paid for? But if the people are not willing to pay for them, that's fine. We won't have any new ones at all.
Any more? Let's just get rest of the recommendations in there, and that's one recommendation. Next recommendation, Hugh. You had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we should recommend a pay rise for poor old Councillor Burnett because he can't afford 30p to go to the toilet when he's down in Brixham.
Serious recommendations, Hugh. Next, serious.
No, that's joking aside, Chair. I did have some serious recommendations. Clearly there was more work to be undertaken by the officers to look at the current service provision to determine whether it's adequate or not, based on the number of actual toilets we have versus the number of people in the population and demographic.
Thank you.
So that was a serious recommendation. And a second serious recommendation, the report, the consultation exercise itself highlighted another issue which I touched upon in my question, which was with regards to the commuting aspect and the service provision and the concerns that were raised by the commuters, and that was something the officers themselves acknowledged they felt that would require further research. So that's two serious recommendations.
Steve Evans and then Jess.
Thank you for coming in, Councillor Bevan. I also noted your recommendation with the rephrasing of that particular paragraph on the commuting within the strategy.
Steve?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I was just joking about with Councillor Burnett. So.
Steve?
Mine is to look for external funding to perhaps increase the toilet usage within Torvine.
Following on from Steve's, that they look at the funding available and incentives that might, could be offered to private business to take out.
Yeah, Councillor Powell, I have that one about encouraging businesses to partake, whether it's through advertising, if it's not obviously financial.
Norma?
Thank you, Chair. It's not only looking at the numbers of the toilets, but the toilets that need to be in certain places. You know what I mean? They've got to be in places where they're going to be used. And I think that's important, because a lot of these on the list, if you were out shopping, you wouldn't be able to use them because they're miles away.
Janet?
Much improved signage on actual buildings and in town centres, proportioning. I know it's on the maps, but it needs to be in hard copies and hard fast.
Just on that point, much improved accessible signage.
Yeah.
Continue to actively look for external funding to create new change in places.
Sort of like Steve's, isn't it? Stuart?
Thank you, Stuart. That we explore the possibilities of our other areas, their charging policy, how it works, and get more information from that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for permitting me to come back in again. I thought of something else. I had a concern about the closure of the toilets at the cemeteries, and I was wanting further information in terms of how many toilet facilities have been closed because they've been deemed to be uneconomic to repair, and I'd like to see some more detailed analysis on what can be done to get these reopened. I mean, it was one idea that's been put forward today is the possibility of charging. Could it not be that where these toilets have been closed because they've been deemed to be uneconomic to repair, we could reopen them with a small charge, and then once the repairs have been paid for, remove the charging?
Severn Bridge ones, is it? So, Glenn?
Oh dear. I think it's a priority that toilets should go where there are no toilets, like facilities. We need some in Abersacan, definitely need something in Abersacan. And I think a priority should be getting one up in our area.
Councillor Jenkins, following on from your comments earlier, I did pop that down as a recommendation that perhaps officers work more closely with members, because obviously you know your ward specs to identify the areas where there are gaps, and also businesses and contacts within your wards where they may be able to provide facilities.
Norma?
I was just going to say, we're all in the same position as you in Aberystwyth. You know, Griffithstown and Sebastopol, no public toilets at all. Very big ward. I think it's the biggest ward in Torfaen as regarding people. No public toilets. But what we need to do too, the public toilets we've got, say in the parks, they're in very bad condition. We should be looking to maintain those and try and keep the ones we've got. And there's nothing being said about maintenance or, you know, bringing them back to a usable standard, which I think is what people would want to see, not just a strategy.
Yes.
Yeah, just following on from that, obviously we're looking at private business, but looking at community groups in particular, because around some that are closed down, some that are still open, they'll be able to access funding that nobody else can, in terms of, you know, bringing those up to scratch, and then from there perhaps there's rules for attendance and things.
Yeah, are we sort of liaising with people for bladder and bowel research to have some feedback off them?
Yes, they have been working with community groups.
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. The environmental recommendations, that we follow those up, because I think there are genuine savings to be made there. Perhaps we could pilot the toilet yet again with solar powers and solar panels, I should say. Flushing systems put in place and explore those opportunities.
Anybody else has got any more recommendations?
I'll say one thing, sir. Yeah.
I will come back in on that. Those are Councillor Evans you did raise earlier in the meeting, which I noted down about looking for alternatives other than the online leaflets, because you were concerned with people who haven't got access to that.
Did you put down my suggestion about looking at partners for, you know, looking at the notice boards, etc., Cumbria Community Council, Yeah? Thanks.
The only thing that hasn't come up, which I did make a slightly flippant remark about, was the mark. You know, the toilet mark? Yeah, the bog mark, standard mark. I'll go again, Steve, because you'll remember that. We need to be able to get that toilet mark as a scheme, and I think the officers need to get that out as quick as possible. The partnership mark with the private toilets and the community councils, that somebody berated me on that.
Let me make sure there's no rings.
Now, can you have a listen now as to what we've recommended so far?
We've forgotten the eco side of things, Stuart, the short flush and the long flush and the low energy lighting.
Yeah, you have, haven't you? Yeah.
Is that in as a recommendation?
And the eco stuff as well, because that was all in there, yeah.
Thank you, members. So I will write those up in a list and circulate those to members within the next week for you to approve before they go back to offices.
I wondered if some could be overlapping, to be honest with you, Chair.
A couple of weeks said that I will merge into one recommendation, so that's why I said I will type them up and forward those to you for approval before they go anywhere.
Can we have one meeting? This is humorous. Can we have one meeting?
Flush with recommendations.
Date of next meeting is very simple. It's next week. We'll see you there Thursday and Friday.
What's wrong with